Hello, welcome to Computer Tech Report. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Apex Stealth and going over its test data. Let's go first a little bit on its spec sheet. It is 26 millimeters thick, hydrodynamic bearing, 12 volts, 0.28 amps, listed maximum RPM. Airflow is at 70.98 CFM and 4.23 millimeters of H2O at 40 decibels by their readings. So my measurements will be through my testing, not their testing. And they had some nice PQ charts. So this is the lab that they used. You can type that link out. Some very interesting data on it. But as I didn't do this type of specific testing, not really going to utilize it. So the first of the major tests is the case simulation test. In this test, it's basically looking at how good the fan is at blowing air through a PC case, and it matters for how big your specific case is. So I did that by measuring at 4 key locations, the 6, the 9, the 11, and 14.5 inch mark, where the 6 inch mark is representative of your small form factor type cases that are still a front to back airflow, and I estimated at approximately like having a 120 millimeter class fan. You would use that for the small cases and as well as for short throw distances, like blowing air up from the bottom of the case towards your GPU, like in the Fractal Design Torrent. Next, we have the 9 inch mark. The 9 inch mark would be like a compact tower. Imagine it would be like having a case that can fit 220 millimeter class fans, but no extra length to contain any more larger fans. So if you have that sort type of case, this is the area you'd be looking at. Next, we have the 11 inch mark. The 11 inch mark is your mid towers. So think of it as being able to hold a 360 millimeter radiator or 320 millimeter class fans inside the computer case. That would be the 11 inch mark. Then we have the 14.5 inch mark, which would be truly large towers, something like the Fractal Design Torrent, where you'd be able to fit 340 millimeter class fans. So this gives you an idea of what size cases, computer cases you want to be specifically looking at for the data point that is going to be most applicable to you. But all that data points doesn't necessarily mean anything without being able to utilize it against something else. So these are taken in the previous graph, the 20, 40, 60, 80, and 100% pitot fan signals. But let's compare it against something. Well, I have my control fan. My control fan is based 3 parts A12X25 to 1 part A14. 2 fans that are very good in their respective categories. Fans over it would be considered good, very good, best. Fans at the line would be considered good. Fans underneath it, close to it but underneath it, would be considered okay. And fans that are well off of it would be considered to okay to bad. So depending on how far off that line is. So I bought 2 Apex Stealths, a black and a silver, and I tested them. The black one I tested at every 5 pitot fan signal, while the silver one I tested at every 10. So that gives a little bit of differentiation in how the data points were kind of collected for the granularity there. So that's where there were some differences in this noise normalized value because of the way it's calculated. But they're very similar results, which is very good. It means that the production of the fans is very consistent, but it's a little bit off from the noise normalized or the control fan. So I'd put it into the okay good category, not good better category. How about at 100% pitot fan signaling? Well, here it makes a lot of sense. These fans can brute force it. Over here on the key for what each of the lines indicates, we have the decibels. So as a reminder, every 10 decibels is a doubling in noise volume. So the Apex Stealths are 5 decibels louder than my control fan, which means they are 50% louder. If it was 10 decibels louder, it would be twice as loud. So they're only 50% louder, which is kind of significant. But we'll get into that in a later section in terms of the noise values. Again, very similar noise values, which is very important. And they follow very similar lines. And higher RPM, be able to brute force it. So they're in a very good category if you need that absolute high airflow. To take things a step further, I normalized for approximately 2,200 RPM. I didn't have an exact data point for the Apex Stealth, so I picked the closest one for each of the 2 fans. just as a direct comparison, and they have very similar airflows and noise levels to my control fan. Again, the control fan is 3 parts A12X25 to 1 part A14, mathematically blended together, so it's not actually a real fan in production. And they have very similar test results, and they follow a very similar trend line. So that means it's a reasonable fan, but just it isn't quite as good at lower noise normalized RPMs. Now, how do these fans compare against a bunch of other fans available on the market? So I did a subsample selection for mostly fans that spin at up to 3000 RPM, so that things would be a little bit more directly comparable for those, but I also selected some other fans that were highly rated. So like the Masterfan SF120M, the General Typhoon, the P12 tested well, and of course the A12X25. So as we can see, they lie more or less in the middle of the pack. So not doing particularly great, not doing particularly bad, just kind of in the middle. I'd put them as an okay case fan, but there are definitely better fans for this in that 120 millimeter class category. Next, the really interesting one is how are these fans doing at 100% PWM fan signaling. So again, on the key on the side, we can see all the different fans and what RPMs they're spinning at. So the Iceberg Thermal Extra, spinning at 3,226 RPM, is rip-roaring loud at 33.4 decibels, but it's also moving the most air, particularly at the 6-inch mark. By the time you reach a larger case at 14.5, it's reduced down to be in line with pretty much every other fan. So it's not particularly efficient at blowing air in a focused manner, but it still moves a significant amount of air and would have a high CFM. The Apex Stealths, on the other hand, are sitting more or less in the bottom middle of the pack overall compared to these other 3000 RPM fans. So not that impressive of a result overall. But one nice thing I can say about the Apex Stealths is they hold on to their airspeed a little bit better than many other 3000 RPM fans, such as the T30, which is right here. It drops off very steeply, but they're definitely not in that best category. So I think it's pretty safe to say that they aren't a top performer as a case fan. So next we have how these fans performing at the 9-inch mark as a case airspeed versus decibels. So how are they doing at that 9-inch mark? So the black one, again, I tested it at every 5 PWM fan signal, so that helps to more finely find if there are any harmonics. I found one very early on at the 25 PWM fan signal, 25%, and then it bounced back. So you can see that just testing it every 10 kind of can potentially skip over a harmonic. Mind, it's not a terrible harmonic. It's at such a low noise level that it was pretty much inaudible, but the microphone is able to pick it up. And as we're going into the 45 PWM fan signal, there's a small harmonic. Again, it's not a large offset. It would be pretty much imperceptible to the human ear. You get basically it would appear that you got a significant increase in airspeed without that much increase in noise. So it's basically just where the fan may have gotten particularly more efficient. And you can see that the silver and the black follow very similar trend lines, which is what you'd want to expect for consistency's sake. My anemometer is accurate to within 0.1 meters per second. My microphone with the testing methodology is accurate within like 2 decibels. So, you know, there's double wiggle room here going on. And you can see that compared to other fans listed in this graph, they're pretty much in the middle. So we have the T30 sitting here right at the bottom. It's just very noisy. It just moves a lot of air. You got the Iceberg Extra sitting right here. It's actually a bit noisier until you reach really high RPMs where it catches up and pushes more air for the given amount of noise. But by that point, it's really, really noisy. So you have to understand what kind of compromises you're getting at. The fans that I'd look at for good airflow would be actually sitting here, like the General Typhoon, the P12, if you can get a good sample. Mind the consistency of P12 seems to be less consistent than other fans. And you have like the Unifan P8 is in here towards the top. Again, that would be the best kind of all-rounder high RPM fan so far that I've taken a look at. Wow, when I copied and pasted that, it didn't look nearly so blocky. Anyways, this is how the fan ranked overall compared to all the other fans I've tested. So now, how do fans do in a cooler testing? My cooler of choice for doing this testing is the Noctua U12A. I am looking at purchasing a radiator for future testing, so if you've got suggestions on one that's got really high density in there, please let me know in the comments, because I'd be interested in kind of adding that to this testing going forward. So anyways, on the left side here, we have RPM on the bottom, airspeed going vertical. On the right side, we have airspeed vertical and noise on the horizontal. So focusing on the left one, it's basically a blade efficiency graph. It is how good is this particular design at moving air. And the blue line is my control, and we can see that the Apex Stealths follow very similar trend lines, which again is very important. It shows consistency in design, and they are outperforming my control fan by a little bit. So that is a very efficient type blade design. As we take a look at noise versus airspeed through the cooler, we can see a little bit of movement back and forth, particularly in the black one where I did a more fine-tuned testing. So it allowed for more variation going on, while the silver, which was tested every 10, kind of smooths out everything. But they stay in a very similar pattern to the control fan until we reach higher RPMs, where they tend to separate out more, so they become more efficient. They're moving more air for a given noise value. But they do proceed to get significantly noisier, which makes a lot of sense because they are spinning significantly faster. But at the limit, so approximately 2,000, 2,100 RPM, they are more efficient than my control fan at moving air. But beyond that, to that 3,000 RPM mark, they do produce more noise than essentially an A12X25 equivalent. But how do they compare against every other fan I've tested, or at least a majority of them, however many I could cram into this graph and still have it make sense? So they're basically sitting in the middle of the pack. It's not a bad place to be in this noise normalized result. They're sitting a little bit above the General Typhoon, which is a great result. The General Typhoon I found to be a pretty good fan overall. The A12X25 is sitting right here, spinning a little, or pushing a little bit more air at that noise normalized value than the Apex Stealths, but only 0.1 meter per second. But that does indicate a moderately significant result. So if I did a bunch of testing on my cooler, here I'm able to estimate a given power draw that the cooler is able to handle for my specific CPU, the 11700K, for the given airspeed. So at 1.3 meters per second, we're looking at around 190 watts of cooling. So adding 0.1 meter per second could potentially give you an extra 5 to 10 watts versus the Apex Stealths. So that gives you some idea of where these fans would be sitting for that specific CPU. Obviously, every CPU is a little bit different, and every cooler is a little bit different, so you can't take that verbatim. But the more or less the way these fans stack up should be very applicable no matter what kind of cooling device you're blowing them through. If you're looking for a much better fan at this noise normalized value, I'm specifically looking at the Unifan P28. I got some very impressive results from the SwaFan, which is in another review. Specifically, the reverse blade did really well in this noise normalized result. I actually tested it 3 passes and it just came out there. So that was an interesting result. I was not expecting that. But how are things looking at 100% PWM fan signaling? Well, as we're taking a look, they are shifted right towards the top of the graphs, but they are not at the tippy top. Over here, you've got the fan name, the RPM of spinning, and the noise level it was generating. So at these higher RPMs, they're still doing pretty well. They are quieter than a bunch of other fans. However, the Unifan P28 is quieter at 24.8 decibels and sitting right in between the two samples, the two fans that I tested. So you could call them effectively equivalent, and the P28 equivalent to that, but at a lower noise level. But they're doing significantly better than a bunch of other fans in terms of how much air they are pushing. So like the Grand Tornado, Mobius OC, 3,200 RPM for that one, is moving less air at a higher noise level. So you do have to pick and choose what is most important to you. And of course, price is a factor, and ability to acquire the fans. If you're looking at more usual type RPMs for coolers, so around that 2,000, 2,100 RPM, we got the Tough Fan 12 Pro, the Wonder Snail sitting right there, the Turbo, the General Typhoon at 23.2 decibels, so only a little bit, or the Apex Stealth is maybe 25-30% louder than that. So they're not significantly louder, but they are moving significantly more air, so you got to choose which is most important to you. Now, in terms of how noisy this fan is for how much air is moving, so through the CPU air cooler, here are the lines. The yellow one is the silver, the orange one is the black, and they're again sitting very close to each other. And once again, the black one had a more fine-tuned granularity in its in the testing for PWM signaling, so that's why they're a little bit different. But they follow a very similar trend line, and they are sitting right in the middle of the pack. Maybe slightly in the upper, which is a good place to be overall. At lower RPMs, they tend to be more mixed in with the rest of them, but as RPMs increase, they do significantly better than many of the competition around it. So there's the black, there's the silver. The only standouts around it are like the Unifan P28, which sits slightly over it across most of its RPM range, and then jumps up right at the end, and the TLB12 Extreme, which at time has not gotten its own review, but I wanted to include it for the dataset because it did fairly well overall. This is a little bit of a simplified view of the exact same thing because the other one is a little bit complicated to read. You get the two fans, you got the P12 Max, the T30 because it's a very popular one, the A12X25, and the P28 because I found the P28 to be just very good, or I particularly liked it in the testing. How'd they rank overall? In Noise Normalized, the silver was in 23rd, the black was in 20th, the A12X25 was in 13th. And at 100% PWM fan signaling, the black was ranked 5th, and the Apex and the silver was ranked 8th. Okay, to mount this fan took a little bit of a different procedure, and I just want to go over it real quick. In order to mount it, you need these stealth mounting nuts. So it goes right at the end. You have the bolt. It goes through because the inside of this, and my focus is off, is not threaded. So you may have to put a finger right there and then use a screwdriver to screw in this screw, because again it's completely unthreaded inside each of these holes. So I ended up needing to use the M4s for this CFM test, my CFM tester. To try to prevent scratches, you have to really hold it in place, and I'd recommend just like getting them in place and then securing the washers, because if you allow something to rub on it, it will scratch the finish, no matter how gentle you are. So the end result on this side looks something like this. So we're going to take a little break from the testing, and I want to talk a little bit about these fans and what AlphaCool is trying to do that made them so special. So first, they are a 6 pole motor. Many cheaper fans, and well, actually a lot of fans tend to be 4 poles, which are easier to produce. Having 6 means that it's able to provide more torque to a smoother blade. So that means less oscillation in the blade speed as it's spinning, because it's hitting a pole more often as opposed to one with only 4. What really made this fan special is the way that it was built. Most other fans are basically, you've got the motor assembly, the bearing with the electromagnets as all one unit built into the frame, built into it, and then you'd have rubber dampeners on each of the edges to absorb the vibrations that the fan and the motor and the bearing all generate. This has a rubber gasket that is between all of that and the fan blades. So you have the fan blades, the motor, the bearing, all of that built into one, and then a rubber gasket that then separates that from the outer frame. So it absorbs it in the middle, which is very creative and actually pretty much harder to do. So it, as we saw in the case simulation test, did fairly well. So getting into what this picture shows, you got the whisker quiet airflow blades, so that was the engineering with the blades to make them quiet, the RPM range, and then the decoupler. So again, that rubber gasket ring that I talked about that takes the frame and separates the blade design, the assembly, where everything locks into it, into the frame, and decouples it using a O-ring basically, and then you got the metal frame. So I didn't register a lot of vibrations, or didn't feel a lot of vibrations in my test apparatus. So it worked. You don't get that transmission. If you were to add rubber dampeners to the frame on the edges, you wouldn't make the fan any quieter. So there wasn't a lot of bearing noise to begin with, or motor noise. And so all the noise you're hearing is actually just the fan moving air. So the improvements to make the fan quieter would actually be in the blade design. So overall, I do think that AlphaCool did a great job in terms of the engineering, but just did not meet the expectations in terms of what they were trying to deliver in terms of practical testing. Now, I've ranted and raved about CFM testing in most of my other videos, but the short story is I don't think CFM testing is a particularly valid test in terms of just an open CFM. So by that, tube, no restrictions, blowing air down it, and saying, hey, look, this fan has a high CFM. It is a good case fan. I don't think doing that testing is particularly valid. If you want to know more reasons, I'd be happy to listen to discussion, but to keep this video going, we're not going to get into it this time. So we got RPM on the bottom, CFM vertical, and decibels on the bottom, and CFM vertical for the right graph. So the control fan and the Apex Stealth follow almost exactly the same trend line. As a matter of fact, the Apex Stealth is slightly behind it. In terms of noise versus CFM, we can see that they follow a very similar trend line, with the Apex Stealth being slightly noisier for that same given amount of airspeed that they're able to generate. But overall, they are following a very similar trend line, indicating a fairly well-designed fan for this test. How does it compare against other fans? Well, we got the P28 sitting right at the top of the graph. We got the T30 sitting up there. And as we come down, we have the Apex Stealth sitting right there in the middle. At 100% P-dome fan ceiling, they are sitting in the upper middle. And you actually can see that they've dropped relative in position to many of the other fans around them. So we have the NFF12 3000 RPM fan sitting over them, the Silentmix 4 Pro 120. Now, what I will say about them is that given their relatively high air speed, they're fairly quiet. However, the Gentle Typhoon, in this particular test, is moving almost the same amount of air, 5 CFM less. I mean, it's there, but it's not that much less, but it's significantly quieter. Standout exceptions are the P28, particularly quiet given how much air it's moving. So again, picking and choosing what makes the most sense to you. In terms of CFM versus decibel rating, well, the Grand Tornado and the P28, I made that mistake. The P28 is right here, this brown one, and the Grand Tornado is this one right here. The Grand Tornado and most other Scythe fans tend to do very bad in this testing. Don't know exactly why, but the CFM test is probably one of the tests that I need to overhaul the most, as this channel will evolve, but I need to keep it consistent for testing's sake. So when I reach the next level in terms of the testing, thanks to viewers like you joining my Patreon, YouTube member, that kind of thing, the testing will evolve and will hopefully become better. But anyways, comparing the Apex Stealths to the other fans around it, they're sitting in the middle. At higher RPMs, they tend to shifted towards the top. At lower RPMs, they're shifted toward the bottom. So these fans are definitely optimized for mid-high RPMs. I would say RPMs over 1,400, 300 RPM. That's when they really start hitting their stride. And a more simplified view, just to really be able to see in there, these would be other top-rated fans. So we have the T30 in there, doing really well. The Apex, or the Noctua A12X25 sitting in there. We got the Silent Wings 4 Pro sitting a little bit towards the bottom. We got the P12 Max. So it gives you some idea of how these fans rank versus other ones. Now, all of that is important. So if you're only looking at raw performance, that's your data. If you care about the value of the fan, so how much performance you're getting for your dollar. These are $32 fans converted into US dollars. Depending on where you live, the currency exchange rates may change, and currency exchange rates may vary day to day for whenever you do make your purchase. Also note that this is purchasing it directly from AlphaCool's website, and you have to pay for shipping. So all in all, for 2 fans, it cost me like $100. So basically, I'm looking at these fans are like $50 fans, but I'm analyzing as if they're $32 fans. So all that said, they are not a particularly good value at the 6-inch mark. Noise normalized at 100%, they're also not a particularly good value when compared to other fans. How about at the 11-inch mark? Well, once again, no, they are not the worst. There are fans that literally are 0 value, but they definitely aren't the best. How about in the CFM test? Well, they are sitting in a very mundane spot. Even at maximum 100% PWM fan signaling, they're very mundane in terms of their value proposition. They're just too expensive for how much performance you're actually getting out of them. And in CPU cooler testing, once again, noise normalized values, they're sitting towards the bottom of the pack. They are right around the value of an A12X25 at noise normalized, but as you crank things up to 11 or 100% PWM fan signaling, they do improve in that value proposition because they're able to push more air than the A12X25, but they're just not sitting in that top value proposition, especially if you're incorporating these fans at higher than a $32 price tag. So for me, including that shipping price, so $50 a piece, let's say, they really aren't that good of a value. So at that point, you're buying these fans for the particular style, that metal housing, the particular look that they're providing, which I do think these fans look excellent. So that's where kind of the end of this lies, is choosing your fan is perfectly valid based on however you want to do it. Value proposition, if you're on a really tight budget or you're looking for a particular aesthetic and these meet that aesthetic, it's a perfectly valid way of justifying your expense, but I can't make that decision for you. I'm just here to present the data, and well, here it is. And at the end of every video, I like to show off my raw data, and this is the data that I generated. You're welcome to use it for your own particular purposes. However, if you're going to use it in any sort of publication, written journal, anything like that, I do ask that you reference me and my channel. Since I'm the one who generated this data, it does belong to me, and it worked really hard to generate it. Testing at every 10%, testing takes around 1.5 to 2 hours to generate this level of detail of just pure testing. So doing it at every 5% means it doubled the time. So that one fan took me like 3 hours, just about. And then it's time to upgrade the graphs, upgrade the charts, make the presentation. So all the details. So I do appreciate giving me credit where credit is due if you're going to look at it. Anyways, I want to thank each and every one of you for watching my video, especially getting this far. If you've got fans that you want me to review, please leave them in the comment section down below. I do actively read them and comment back. I do have a Patreon page for support and helping make all this testing possible and buying the equipment and the fans. I also have a Discord page. If you want to communicate with me that way. Mostly fans, talking about fans, cases, whatever, whatever you want. I'll even talk about keyboards. But other than that, thank you very much. Have a great day, and hope to see you next time here on Computer Tech and More.